The alarms scream through the hull before I even understand what is happening. Red light floods the corridor, painting the walls the color of warning. I am Ysara Velkorath, heir to the Thesserine Dominion, and in this moment, none of my titles matter at all. Report, I snap, gripping the edge of my seat as the ship lurches. My voice comes out steadier than I feel. Commander Threx, the head of my Vantiri honor guard, does not answer me right away. He is staring at the display, and for the first time in the 20 years he has served my family, I see something on his face that I never expected to see there. Fear. Raiders, he finally says. 3 ships. They dropped out of hyperspace directly on top of us. Shields at 60% and falling. I stand. My ceremonial robes suddenly feel heavy and useless, like a costume for a role I no longer have time to play. Then we fight, or we run. Which is it? Threx does not look at me. He looks at the other guards, the 6 warriors who swore blood oaths to protect my line before I was even born. Something passes between them, a silent conversation I am not part of, and it makes my stomach twist. Escape pods, Threx says. Now. For a moment I think he means for all of us. I move toward the pod bay, already calculating who will fit where, already thinking of the fastest path. Then I notice that none of them are moving toward me. They are moving toward the pods themselves, without me, without a single glance back. Threx, I say, and my voice cracks despite every lesson in composure I have ever been given. Threx, what are you doing? He pauses at the hatch, just for a second. The odds are too poor, Your Highness. I am sorry. Then the hatch closes, and I am alone in a corridor that is shaking apart around me, listening to the sound of 6 escape pods launching, one after another, carrying away the only protection I have ever known. I do not have time to feel the full weight of it yet. The ship groans again, metal complaining somewhere deep in its bones, and I press myself against the wall as sparks rain down from a ruptured conduit above. My mind, trained since childhood to remain calm in council chambers and formal ceremonies, has absolutely no idea what to do with a burning corridor and abandonment. You should not be standing there. The voice startles me so badly I nearly lose my footing. I turn and find a man standing a few feet away, a fire extinguisher in one hand and an expression of calm concentration that seems entirely out of place given the circumstances. I recognize him only vaguely. Ethan Cole, the human translator my court brought along for trade negotiations, a role so far beneath my notice that I have exchanged perhaps 10 words with him during the entire voyage. Where is your escape pod? I ask, because it is the only question that makes sense to me. Humans didn't get assigned pods, he says, glancing up at the ceiling as another shower of sparks falls. Guess nobody thought we'd need one. There is no bitterness in his voice, only a kind of practical acceptance, as if this is simply how the universe has always treated him and he has stopped expecting otherwise. It should not surprise me. My empire has never valued his species very highly, useful for grunt work, translation, small tasks unworthy of my own people's attention, nothing more. Then we are both stranded, I say. Looks that way. He tosses the extinguisher aside and picks up a fire axe from a wall mount instead, testing its weight in his hand like he has held one before. Which means we should probably stop standing in a burning hallway and find somewhere safer to think. I want to argue that I do not take orders from a translator, that I am the heir to an empire spanning 11 star systems, that every instinct in my genetically refined bloodline tells me I should be the one giving directions. But another explosion rocks the ship, closer this time, and whatever pride I might have clung to gets knocked loose along with my footing. He catches my arm before I fall. It is such a small thing, such an ordinary human reflex, but it lands on me strangely. None of my guards have ever touched me without ceremony, without permission, without 3 layers of protocol wrapped around the gesture. He does it without thinking, the way anyone would catch a person who is about to fall, and then he lets go just as quickly, as if he has already forgotten it happened. This way, he says, nodding toward a side corridor. Maintenance access. Smaller, but it should get us away from the hull breaches. I follow him, because I do not have a better option, and because some small part of me is curious about a man who stayed behind when he had every reason and every right to save himself first. The corridor he leads me through is narrow and dim, lit only by emergency strips along the floor. Somewhere behind us, I hear voices. Not my guards. Something rougher, harsher, speaking a language I recognize from old intelligence briefings. Raiders. They have boarded already. They're fast, Ethan mutters, pressing his back against the wall and peering around a corner. Faster than I expected. You expected this? I ask, incredulous. I expected something could go wrong on a diplomatic transport carrying an imperial heir through contested space with a security escort of 6 people, he says, not unkindly. I didn't expect the 6 people to leave first. The words land like a slap, mostly because they are true, and because he says them without any satisfaction, only a kind of tired disappointment that somehow stings more than anger would have. They swore oaths, I say, and I am not sure if I am defending them or simply trying to convince myself that the last 20 minutes did not happen the way I watched them happen. I'm sure they did. He glances at me, and there is no judgment in his eyes, only something quieter. Oaths don't mean much if people only keep them when it's easy. I do not have a response to that. I have spent my entire life surrounded by sworn protectors, by bonded warriors bred for loyalty, and it has never once occurred to me that loyalty could simply be a performance, a currency that gets spent only when the cost of paying it is low. Voices again, closer now. Ethan presses a finger to his lips and gestures for me to follow him deeper into the maintenance shaft. I do, ducking under a low pipe, my formal robes catching on exposed wiring. He notices and, without a word, produces a small folding knife and cuts away the trailing fabric so it will not snag again. It is such a practical gesture, so unlike anything my own household attendants would ever think to do, that it catches me off guard all over again. You carry a knife, I observe. I carry a lot of things, he says. Most people don't notice, because most people don't look at me twice. There is no self-pity in the way he says it. It is simply a fact of his existence, the way my empire has structured the galaxy so that his kind moves through it mostly unseen, mostly unconsidered, useful only in the smallest and least respected ways. We reach a junction where the maintenance shaft opens into a wider service bay, and Ethan holds up a hand for me to stop. Through a grated vent, I can see them, raiders, 4 of them, moving through the corridor beyond in tight, practiced formation. They are searching room by room, methodical, unhurried, the way predators move when they already believe they have won. They're looking for you, Ethan whispers. How do you know? Because they're checking crew quarters first, not cargo. They know exactly who's on this ship and exactly what they came for. He studies the group a moment longer, his eyes tracking their weapons, their spacing, the way they communicate with small hand signals rather than words. And they're good, too good for random raiders. I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the ship's failing environmental controls. You think this was planned. I think, he says slowly, that your guards left awfully fast for people who didn't already suspect something like this was coming. The thought settles into me like a stone dropped into still water, spreading outward in ways I am not ready to examine yet. I push it aside for now, because the raiders are moving closer, and survival has to come before suspicion. Ethan pulls me back from the vent, just as one of the raiders glances toward our position. We freeze, pressed into the shadow of a support strut, and I realize I am holding my breath the way I have never had to before, because for the first time in my life, no one is standing between me and danger except a man my own empire taught me to overlook. The footsteps pass. The voices fade. Ethan lets out a slow breath and looks at me, and for just a moment, something almost like reassurance crosses his face. We're going to get through this, he says. You don't know that. No, he admits. But panicking won't help either of us, so I'd rather say something useful. It is such a small, strange kind of comfort, offered so plainly and without any of the elaborate reassurances my court advisors would wrap around bad news. I find myself, against every instinct my upbringing has given me, believing him just a little. We move deeper into the ship, away from the raiders, away from the burning sections, searching for somewhere safe enough to think, to plan, to understand exactly how much danger we are truly in. I do not yet know that the 6 guards who abandoned me were not simply cowards. I do not yet know how deep this goes, or who arranged for me to be left alone on a dying ship in contested space. All I know, in this moment, crouched in a narrow maintenance shaft with a man my empire taught me to ignore, is that he is the only one who stayed. And somehow, that single fact is beginning to matter more to me than every oath sworn by every guard who left. The ship groans again around us, another system failing somewhere in its depths, and Ethan looks at me with a steadiness that has nothing to do with rank or bloodline or bred loyalty. "Stay close to me," he says. "We're not done yet." I nod, and for the first time since the alarms began screaming, I let myself believe it might actually be true. We move further into the shadows together, an Empress and a man my empire never thought worth noticing, and somewhere above us, the raiders continue their search, unaware that the last line of defense, left standing between them and the heir to the Thesserine dominion, is a translator holding a fire axe and a knife, refusing to leave. The corridor ahead splits in 2 directions, one leading further into the ship, the other toward an old cargo lift that has not been used since before I was born. Ethan studies both paths for a moment, weighing options I would never have considered on my own, and I realize with a strange, quiet clarity that my survival, for the first time in my entire life, depends entirely on someone I was taught to look past. I decide, in that moment, that I will not make that mistake again. We choose the cargo lift, mostly because Ethan believes the raiders will expect us to run deeper into the ship rather than toward an old, forgotten service route. He presses the controls, and after a groan of protest, the lift begins its slow climb toward the upper decks. "You seem to know this ship well," I say, watching him study the control panel with quiet familiarity. "I read the schematics before we left port," he says. "Habit. Why would a translator study the ship's maintenance schematics?" He shrugs, a small, almost embarrassed gesture. "Because knowing the layout of a place means knowing your options if something goes wrong. Most people don't bother. I always do. It strikes me as an odd kind of caution, the sort of thing a soldier might do, not a translator hired to smooth over trade negotiations between my empire and the outer systems." I find myself looking at him differently, noticing details I dismissed before. The way he moves without wasted motion, the way his eyes catalog every exit, every shadow, every possible threat, even while he speaks to me in a calm, measured voice. "You are not simply a translator," I say. "I'm exactly what my contract says I am," he replies. "But that doesn't mean I walked onto this ship without preparing for the worst. My people don't get the luxury of assuming someone else will protect us." There is no accusation in his voice, only plain honesty, and somehow that makes it land harder than if he had spoken with anger. I think of Threx, of the 5 other guards who fled with him, of the blood oaths my family paid dearly to secure, generations of loyalty bred into their very genetics. And I think of this man, who owes my empire nothing beyond a temporary contract, who stayed anyway. "Why did you stay?" I ask. "Because I need to understand it, because it does not fit any pattern my education has ever given me. You have no oath to me, no bond, no obligation beyond your contract, and contracts do not typically extend to sacrificing your life." He considers the question seriously, the way he seems to consider everything, without rushing toward an easy answer. "Where I come from, we don't leave people behind. Doesn't matter if it's family, a stranger, someone we just met an hour ago. If someone needs help, and we can give it, we give it. That's just how we're raised." "Even at the cost of your own life?" "Especially then," he says. "Otherwise it doesn't mean anything." I sit with that for a long moment, as the lift continues its slow ascent, the metal groaning around us, distant explosions still echoing somewhere in the lower decks. My entire life I have been taught that humans are a lesser species, useful only for simple tasks, incapable of the discipline and honor bred into my own people through centuries of careful genetic cultivation. I have never once questioned this teaching, because I had never once been given a reason to. Now I have exactly one, standing in front of me, holding a fire axe, refusing to abandon someone his own society has taught him to consider beneath his notice as well, in a different but no less real way. My guards were bred for loyalty, I say quietly, almost to myself. Bonded to my bloodline through genetic conditioning meant to make betrayal nearly impossible, and they left within minutes of the first alarm. Breeding doesn't make someone loyal, Ethan says. It just makes them predictable, right up until the moment predictability stops being convenient. The lift shudders to a stop, and the doors slide open onto a narrow observation deck, mostly dark, lit only by starlight streaming through a long viewport. Ethan moves first, checking the corners, confirming it is empty before waving me forward. I notice, again, how naturally he takes point, how easily he positions himself between me and any potential threat, without ceremony, without being asked. We should rest here for a few minutes, he says, catch our breath, figure out our next move. I sink onto a bench along the wall, my legs finally allowing themselves to shake, now that there is a moment of safety to shake in. Ethan sits nearby, not too close, keeping a respectful distance even now, even after everything. Tell me something, I say. Truthfully, do you believe my guards were paid to abandon me? He is quiet for a moment, weighing his words carefully. I think 6 trained guards do not all flee in perfect unison unless they already expected trouble, or unless someone told them exactly when to leave. The suggestion settles over me like a shadow, cold and unwelcome. I think of my cousin, Lord Kydron Velkorath, next in line after me, a man who has always smiled a fraction too widely at court gatherings, who has always seemed just a little too comfortable in the idea of a future where I do not exist. I think of how convenient it would be for him if I simply vanished during a raider attack in contested space, far from witnesses, far from questions. If you are right, I say slowly, then this was never a random attack. It was arranged. That would explain why they're being so thorough, Ethan says. Random raiders grab what they can and leave fast, before reinforcements arrive. These ones are searching room by room like they have all the time in the world and know exactly what they're looking for. A chill runs through me that has nothing to do with the ship's failing environmental systems. If my own guards were paid to abandon me, then somewhere back home, someone has already begun preparing for a future in which I never return. The realization should terrify me more than it does. Instead, it hardens into something colder and more useful, determination. Then we cannot simply hide, I say. We need proof, evidence of who arranged this and why. The ship's black box would have a full record, Ethan says. Every communication in and out, every command given to the crew before the attack. If your guards were tipped off in advance, it will be logged there. Can you access it? I can try. It's usually located near the main communications array, which means we'll have to move through more of the ship, likely through areas the raiders are still searching. I look at him, at the calm, steady way he considers a plan that could easily get us both killed, and I realize that somewhere in the last hour, my perception of him has shifted entirely. He is no longer the translator I barely noticed during formal negotiations. He is the only person on this entire ship who has not once hesitated to place himself between me and danger, expecting nothing in return. Ethan, I say, using his name for the first time since this began, why does this matter so much to you? I am not your Empress. I am not even truly your responsibility. He looks at me for a long moment, something thoughtful and a little sad passing behind his eyes. Maybe not by any contract, but you're a person in danger, and I'm a person who can help. That's the only qualification that's ever mattered to me. It is such a simple answer, and yet it undoes something in me that 20 years of imperial education never managed to touch. I have spent my entire life believing that loyalty must be bred, bonded, sworn through blood oaths and genetic conditioning in order to mean anything at all. I am beginning to understand that the truest loyalty I have ever witnessed came from someone who owed me nothing and gave everything anyway. "Thank you," I say, and the words feel strange in my mouth, because I cannot recall the last time I said them to anyone who was not a foreign dignitary during formal negotiations. "For staying." He offers a small, tired smile. "Let's get you home first. You can thank me properly once we're both safe." We do not have long to rest. A distant clang echoes through the observation deck, followed by voices, closer than before, moving in our direction. Ethan is on his feet instantly, pulling me up with him, already scanning the room for another exit. "They found the lift shaft," he says. "We need to move now." There is a maintenance hatch on the far side of the observation deck, half hidden behind a support column, and Ethan leads me toward it without hesitation. As we move, I find myself matching his pace instinctively, no longer trailing behind him like a passenger being led to safety, but moving alongside him, watching the same corners he watches, listening for the same sounds. "You're learning fast," he says, glancing at me with something like approval. "I have an excellent teacher," I reply, and for just a moment, despite everything, something like a real smile crosses his face. We reach the hatch, just as the voices grow loud enough to make out words, harsh and clipped, a language I recognize from old briefings on raider clans operating along the outer trade routes. Ethan pulls the hatch open, and we slip through together, sealing it quietly behind us, disappearing once again into the ship's hidden arteries. Ahead of us lies the path toward the communications array, and with it, the truth about who truly arranged for me to be left alone on a dying ship. I do not know yet how deep the betrayal runs, or how many people back home are complicit in it. I only know that whatever answers we find, I will not face them alone, because for the first time in my life, someone has chosen to stand beside me for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. And somewhere in the depths of that thought, I begin to understand that everything I was taught about strength, about loyalty, about which species deserves respect and which does not, has been wrong in ways I am only beginning to measure. The maintenance corridor beyond the hatch is narrower than the last, forcing us to move single file, Ethan in front, me close behind. The lighting here has failed almost entirely, leaving only the faint glow of emergency strips to guide our steps. Somewhere ahead, the hum of the ship's secondary power core vibrates through the walls, and Ethan tells me it means we are close to the section housing the communications array. We nearly make it without incident. Nearly. A grate ahead of us clatters loudly as Ethan's boot catches its edge, and the sound echoes down the corridor far louder than either of us wants. Within seconds, voices respond from somewhere close, sharp and alert, no longer the idle chatter of a routine search. "They heard that," Ethan mutters, already moving faster. "We need to reach the array before they cut us off." We round a corner and nearly collide with two raiders coming from the opposite direction. For a half second, everyone freezes, the shock of unexpected contact working against all of us equally. Then the larger of the two reaches for the weapon at his side, and Ethan moves before I can even process what is happening. He drives forward, closing the distance before the raider can raise his weapon, using the fire axe not as a striking tool but as a lever, hooking it against the raider's arm and forcing it wide, off target. The weapon discharges into the ceiling instead of at us, showering sparks down around all of us. Ethan follows the motion with his shoulder, driving the raider back into the corridor wall hard enough to knock the air from him. The second raider lunges toward me, and instinct alone makes me step back, but there is nowhere to go in the narrow corridor. I raise my arms, bracing for impact, when Ethan pivots, catching the second raider's wrist mid-reach and twisting it sharply enough that the raider's weapon clatters to the floor. "Run," Ethan says to me, his voice tight but controlled, "toward the array. I'll catch up." "I am not leaving you," I say, and I surprise myself with how firmly I mean it. There is no time to argue further. The first raider recovers and surges forward again, and Ethan turns to meet him, putting himself squarely between me and both attackers. I search the corridor frantically, and spot a length of pipe knocked loose from the earlier explosions. Without thinking too hard about what I am doing, I grab it and swing it toward the second raider, just as he reaches for his fallen weapon. The pipe connects with his shoulder, not hard enough to do serious harm, but hard enough to knock him off balance and buy Ethan a precious second. He uses it well, driving the flat of the axe head into the first raider's midsection, forcing him back against the wall and pinning him there long enough to wrench the weapon from his grip and toss it down the corridor, out of reach. "Behind you!" I shout, because the second raider is recovering, reaching again for his own weapon on the floor. Ethan spins, and this time I move without waiting to be told, stepping forward and bringing the pipe down again, this time across the raider's forearm just as his fingers close around the weapon. He cries out and pulls back, and Ethan finishes it, shoving him hard enough into the first raider that both of them tumble into a tangled heap on the floor. "Go, now," Ethan says, grabbing my arm and pulling me past the fallen raiders before either can recover fully. We run, my formal robes hindering every stride, my lungs burning with effort I have never once needed to exert in my entire sheltered life. Behind us, I hear the raiders shouting, recovering, giving chase. Ethan does not slow, guiding me through a series of twisting corridors with the same quiet confidence he has shown since the moment the alarms first sounded. We reach a junction, and Ethan pulls me sideways into a narrow alcove just as a group of 3 more raiders rushes past the main corridor, drawn by the earlier commotion. We press ourselves into the shadows, and I feel Ethan's heartbeat through the arm he still holds against mine, fast but steady, the rhythm of someone managing fear rather than surrendering to it. Once the footsteps fade, he lets out a slow breath. That was closer than I would have liked. "You are hurt," I say, noticing for the first time the way he holds his side, the faint wince he tries to hide when he shifts his weight. "It's nothing. Caught an elbow when I pinned the first one. I'll live." "Let me see." "We don't have time." "Ethan." I say his name firmly enough that he stops arguing, and lifts his jacket just enough for me to see a darkening bruise spreading along his ribs where the earlier blow landed. Nothing broken, from what I can tell, but painful all the same. "You took that hit protecting me." "That's generally what protecting someone means," he says, with a faint attempt at humor that does not fully mask the discomfort in his voice. I press my hand briefly against the bruise, an old, mostly ceremonial gesture my people use to offer comfort, though I have never once performed it for anyone outside my own bloodline. He looks at me, surprised, and something unspoken passes between us in that moment, quiet and real in a way that feels entirely separate from titles or species or the vast gulf my empire has built between our two peoples. "We should keep moving," he says finally, gently pulling his jacket back down. "The array should be just ahead." We move more carefully now, checking each junction before crossing it, listening for footsteps, for voices, for anything that might warn us of another confrontation. I find myself watching Ethan differently than I did even an hour ago. Not as a translator, not as someone beneath my notice, but as someone who has fought twice now to keep me safe, without hesitation, without complaint, without ever once suggesting that my life matters more than his own, simply because of the title I carry. "Can I ask you something?" I say quietly as we move. "Of course. Back on my homeworld, humans are considered lesser, useful for labor, for simple tasks, nothing more. I have never questioned this belief in my entire life, but everything you have done today contradicts it entirely." He is quiet for a moment, and I worry I have offended him, though his expression shows no anger, only a kind of tired familiarity. It's not the first time I've heard something like that. Different empires, different reasons, but the pattern's usually the same. Someone decides another group is less capable, less worthy, and treats them accordingly, right up until that group proves them wrong in a moment that actually matters. "I am sorry," I say, and I mean it more deeply than the words can properly convey, for every assumption I carried onto this ship without ever questioning it. "Apology accepted," he says simply, without dwelling on it, without demanding more than that. Now let's focus on getting you home so you can start questioning a few other assumptions too. We reach a heavy door marked with faded lettering indicating the communications array beyond it. Ethan tries the control panel, and after a tense moment, the door slides open with a groan of protesting hydraulics. Inside, the room is dim but intact, banks of equipment lining the walls, most of it still humming faintly with residual power. "This is it," Ethan says, moving toward the main console. "If the black box recorded anything before your guards fled, it will be logged here." I follow him inside, and as the door seals behind us, I feel a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief, because we have made it this far without serious harm. Dread, because whatever we find in this room may confirm exactly how deep the betrayal against me truly runs, and how far my own family may be willing to go to secure a throne they believe should never have been mine to inherit in the first place. Ethan begins working the console, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across controls I barely recognize, and I stand watch at the door, pipe still gripped tightly in my hand, ready to defend the man who has already risked everything to defend me. "I'm in," Ethan says after several tense minutes, his eyes fixed on the console's flickering display. The black box logged everything, right up until the main power failed: communications, command orders, crew movements. "Show me," I say, moving to stand beside him, my earlier caution about propriety long since abandoned in favor of simple necessity. He pulls up a log of encrypted transmissions sent to the ship in the hours before the attack. Most of it is routine: cargo manifests, navigation updates, the mundane traffic of any long voyage. But buried within it is a single transmission, received less than an hour before the raiders dropped out of hyperspace, addressed directly to Commander Threx's private terminal, encrypted with a cipher I recognize instantly, because it belongs to my own family's private communication network. "That's a Velkorath household cipher," I say, my voice tight. "Only a handful of people have access to it. Can you break it?" "I do not need to break it," I say, pointing to the sender identification tag partially visible beneath the encryption layer. I recognize the routing signature. It originates from my cousin's private terminal. The room feels colder suddenly, though nothing in the environmental systems has changed. Lord Kydron Velkorath, my father's brother's son, next in line for the throne, should I fail to produce an heir, or should I simply cease to exist. I have always known he resented standing one step removed from power he believed should have been his, by right of temperament, if not by birth order. I never imagined he would go this far to claim it. "Can we access the full content of the message?" I ask. Ethan works the console further, and after a moment, a partial transcript appears, garbled in places where the encryption remains only partially broken, but clear enough in the sections that matter most. Instructions to Commander Threx, timed precisely to coincide with the raider attack, ordering the guard to abandon their post the moment hostile ships appeared, framed as an unavoidable tactical retreat rather than the deliberate betrayal it truly represents. "He arranged all of this," I whisper, reading the words again, hoping somehow they might change if I look closely enough. They do not. My own cousin arranged for me to die on this ship, disguised as a random raider attack. "We need to get this evidence back to your empire," Ethan says. "Broadcast it. Transmit it somewhere secure. Anything to make sure it survives, even if we don't. There is a secure relay station 3 systems from here," I say, my mind already racing through logistics, contingencies, anything to hold on to some sense of control in the face of a betrayal this deep. If we can transmit the evidence there, it would reach my father's court within hours. Then let's do that. Ethan begins configuring the console for a long-range transmission, his hands moving quickly, efficiently, and I find myself grateful all over again for a skill set my empire never bothered to notice he possessed. Before he can complete the sequence, the door behind us shudders under a heavy impact. We both turn as the reinforced panel buckles slightly, followed by a second impact, harder than the first. "They found us," Ethan says grimly. "I need another minute to finish this transmission." "Then I will buy you that minute," I say, positioning myself near the door with the pipe still gripped tightly in my hands. "Ysara, you have protected me since the moment this began," I say, using my given name deliberately, without the weight of my titles attached to it. "Let me help protect what we have found." He hesitates only a moment before nodding, understanding that arguing further would waste time neither of us can afford. He returns to the console, and I brace myself near the door as it buckles under a third impact, then a fourth, the metal beginning to warp along its edges. "Almost there," Ethan says, his voice tight with concentration. "Just need to lock in the relay coordinates." The door gives way on the fifth impact, and two raiders push through into the room, weapons raised, clearly expecting to find easy targets rather than resistance. I do not give them the chance to fully process the situation. I swing the pipe hard against the nearest raider's weapon arm, knocking his aim wide just as he fires, the shot scorching harmlessly into the ceiling. The second raider turns his attention toward me, and for a moment I feel real fear, sharp and immediate, the kind no amount of Imperial education ever prepared me for. Then Ethan is there, abandoning the console just long enough to intercept the second raider, driving him backward with the flat of the axe before the man can bring his weapon fully to bear. "The transmission!" I shout. "Locked in," Ethan calls back, ducking beneath a wild swing from the raider he is grappling with. "Sending now, but it needs 30 more seconds to complete the upload." 30 seconds has never felt so impossibly long. I turn back to the first raider, who has recovered his balance and is advancing toward me again, and I realize with startling clarity that I have exactly two choices. Freeze, the way every instinct bred into me by a sheltered, privileged upbringing urges me to do, or fight, the way the only person who has stayed beside me through all of this has been teaching me, quietly and without lectures, since the moment the alarms first sounded. I choose to fight. I duck beneath his first strike and drive the pipe upward into his midsection, using every ounce of desperate strength I possess. It is not an elegant strike, nothing like the disciplined forms my Vantiri guards practice daily, but it lands hard enough to double him over, buying precious seconds. I follow it with a strike across his shoulders that sends him stumbling into the wall, and for the first time in my entire life, I understand viscerally what it means to defend myself rather than simply being defended. Across the room, Ethan finally gets the upper hand against the second raider, using the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a bank of equipment, where he slumps, dazed and disoriented. Ethan glances toward the console, and relief washes visibly across his face. "Transmission complete," he says. "The evidence is away. Nothing they do to this console now can stop it from reaching your father's court." The first raider, the one I struck, recovers enough to reach for a communicator at his belt, likely calling for reinforcements, but Ethan crosses the room in 3 quick strides and knocks the device from his grip before he can complete the call. "We need to move, now," Ethan says. "More of them will be coming." We slip back through the ruined doorway, leaving the 2 disoriented raiders behind us, and retreat into the maintenance corridors once more, moving quickly, urgently, aware that reinforcements could arrive at any moment. My heart pounds, not only from the effort of the fight, but from the strange, unfamiliar thrill of having genuinely defended myself, of having contributed something real, rather than simply being protected from a safe distance. "You fought well," Ethan says, glancing at me as we move. "I had an excellent example to follow," I reply, and this time when he smiles, it reaches his eyes fully, unguarded, genuine. We do not have long to appreciate the small victory. As we round another corner, deeper alarms begin sounding through the ship, different from the earlier hull breach warnings. Ethan stops abruptly, listening. "That's a boarding alert," he says. "A different kind of boarding, larger vessel, judging by the alarm pattern. Reinforcements? Could be theirs, could be something else entirely." He studies the corridor ahead, weighing options. Either way, we need somewhere defensible until we know which it is. We retreat toward a maintenance bay we passed earlier, a small enclosed space with a single reinforced door, easily sealed and defended if necessary. Ethan checks the space quickly, confirming it is empty, before sealing the door behind us and jamming a length of pipe through the mechanism to prevent it from being forced open easily. "Now we wait," he says, settling near the door, weapon ready, watching me with quiet concern. "You did well back there, better than you probably realize." "I had no other choice," I say, though something in his words settles warmly in my chest, despite the danger still surrounding us. "There's always another choice," he says gently. "You chose to fight instead of freeze. That matters more than you know." Outside, the sounds of the ship shifting under new activity grow louder. Footsteps, voices, the distant hum of docking clamps engaging against the hull. Whatever is coming, friend or further threat, we will face it together, exactly as we have faced everything since the moment my own guards chose to abandon me to a fate I now understand was arranged from the very beginning by someone who was supposed to be family. I look at Ethan, steady and watchful beside the sealed door, and I make a quiet promise to myself in that moment. Whatever happens next, whatever the outcome of this desperate flight through a dying ship, I will never again mistake bread obligation for true loyalty, and I will never again overlook someone simply because my empire taught me they were beneath my notice. The pounding on the sealed door comes minutes later, sharp and deliberate, followed by a voice calling out in formal Thessalene, identifying itself as an Imperial rescue vessel, responding to an emergency transmission. Ethan looks at me, uncertain whether to trust it, and I move closer to the door, listening carefully to the cadence of the voice, the precise formal phrasing that only genuine Imperial forces would use. "It is genuine," I say. "That greeting protocol is only taught to certified naval officers. Raiders would have no reason to know it." Ethan removes the pipe jamming the door mechanism, and it slides open to reveal a squad of Imperial Marines, weapons lowered the instant their commanding officer recognizes me beneath the soot and torn fabric of my once formal robes. "Your Highness," the officer says, bowing deeply, "we received an emergency transmission carrying evidence of a conspiracy against the throne. Admiral Vesic dispatched us immediately upon verification." Relief floods through me so completely that my legs nearly give out, and it is Ethan who steadies me again, the same quiet reflex that caught me in the very first moments of this entire ordeal. "The raiders," I say, "are they still aboard?" "Retreating, Your Highness." Once our fleet arrived, they broke off their search and fled rather than risk engagement with Imperial forces. We believe they were contracted specifically for this operation and had no interest in a prolonged conflict once their true target became unreachable. I glance at Ethan, and something unspoken passes between us. Contracted raiders, arranged well in advance, precisely as we suspected from the moment we found that encrypted transmission addressed to Commander Threx. "I need to speak with my father directly," I say, "and I need this man's testimony recorded formally, alongside the evidence we already transmitted." The officer glances at Ethan, a flicker of the same dismissive assessment I once would have made myself, quickly noting his simple attire, his lack of formal rank insignia, the assumption that he is merely staff rather than someone of consequence. I feel a flash of something sharp and protective rise in me before the officer can voice whatever casual judgment is forming behind his eyes. "This man," I say firmly, "saved my life multiple times over the course of this attack, at considerable risk to his own. He will be treated with the full respect owed to someone who has served the throne with distinction, and his testimony will carry full weight in any formal inquiry." The officer straightens, recalibrating instantly, and bows toward Ethan with genuine respect this time. "Of course, Your Highness. My apologies." Ethan, for his part, seems almost uncomfortable with the sudden attention, shifting his weight slightly, the same quiet humility he has shown throughout our entire ordeal. "I only did what anyone should do," he says. "Not everyone," I reply quietly, "so only he can hear. Only you did." The journey back to my father's court takes several days, during which the evidence we transmitted is thoroughly analyzed, cross-referenced with additional communications intercepted from my cousin's private network, building a case so complete that even his most loyal supporters find themselves unable to argue against its weight. Lord Kydron Velkorath, it turns out, had been planning this for months, cultivating relationships with raider factions along the outer trade routes, arranging for my transport route to be leaked, paying Commander Threx and the rest of my honor guard a sum large enough to ensure their sudden, unified retreat the moment danger appeared. I learn, during those days of travel, that my cousin believed himself uniquely suited to rule, more decisive, more willing to make hard choices than he considered me capable of making. He had convinced himself that removing me was simply a pragmatic necessity, a small cruelty in service of what he believed would ultimately be a stronger empire under his leadership. He never anticipated that a translator my own court considered beneath serious notice would become the single unbreakable obstacle standing between his ambition and its completion. When we finally arrive at my father's court, the atmosphere is thick with tension, courtiers whispering in tight clusters, guards standing at rigid attention, everyone aware that something significant is about to unfold, but uncertain exactly how it will resolve. My father meets us in the grand receiving hall, his expression carefully neutral in the way that court protocol demands, though I can see the genuine relief beneath it, the fear he must have carried since the moment word first reached him that my transport had gone dark. "Ysara," he says, embracing me briefly, a rare display of open emotion for a man who has spent decades cultivating an image of unshakable composure. "We feared the worst." "I nearly experienced it," I say, glancing back toward Ethan, who stands respectfully at the edge of the hall, uncertain of his place in this formal setting, despite everything he has done to earn one. But I did not face it alone. My father's gaze follows mine, taking in Ethan's simple attire, the same dismissive assessment the Marine officer made days earlier evident in the brief flicker of his expression. I feel that same protective sharpness rise in me again, and this time I do not hesitate to address it directly. "Father," I say, my voice carrying clearly across the hall, "I would like to formally present Ethan Cole, who saved my life on multiple occasions during the attack, who fought alongside me when my own sworn guards abandoned their posts, and who ensured the evidence of Cousin Kadron's betrayal reached this court safely." A murmur ripples through the gathered courtiers, and I see Lord Kydron himself, standing near the dais with an expression of carefully controlled composure that cannot quite mask the tightness around his eyes. He must have believed, until this very moment, that some version of events might still be spun in his favor. The presence of both myself and Ethan, alive and bearing direct testimony, ends that possibility entirely. "Bring forth Commander Threx," my father orders, and the guard captain is led into the hall moments later, stripped of his ceremonial armor, his expression carrying none of the confidence he displayed throughout his years of service to my family. "Is it true," my father asks, his voice carrying the full weight of imperial authority, "that you and the rest of the honor guard assigned to protect my daughter abandoned your posts upon receiving payment from Lord Kydron Velkorath?" Threx's silence answers more completely than any words could. My father's expression hardens, and he turns to the assembled court, his voice carrying the finality of judgment already decided. "The bonds of blood oath were meant to guarantee loyalty beyond the temptation of any bribe," he says. Clearly, that guarantee has proven hollow when tested against real danger. Effective immediately, the entire honor guard assigned to my daughter is stripped of rank and remanded for formal judgment alongside Lord Kydron, whose ambitions have cost this family far more than he ever imagined he might gain. Guards move to escort both Threx and my cousin from the hall, and I watch them go without any satisfaction, only a quiet, sad recognition that the systems my empire built to guarantee loyalty had been hollow all along, purchasable the moment the price was right. "Ysara," my father says, turning back to me once the hall has settled again, "you have shown remarkable composure through an ordeal that would break lesser resolve. What would you have done differently, knowing what you know now?" It is, I realize, an invitation, a chance to reshape something fundamental within my own household, and I do not intend to waste it. "I would trust loyalty that is chosen rather than bred," I say, turning to face the full assembly of the court. "Bloodline oaths and genetic conditioning clearly guarantee nothing beyond convenience. But there was one person on that ship who had no oath to me, no bond, no obligation beyond a temporary contract, and he stayed anyway, fought anyway, risked everything anyway, expecting nothing in return. I turn to Ethan, who stands quietly at the edge of the hall, clearly uncertain what is about to happen, and I extend my hand toward him, inviting him forward into the center of the assembly for the first time since we boarded that doomed transport together. "Ethan Cole," I say, my voice steady despite the weight of what I am about to do, "I am formally requesting that you serve as my personal protector, sworn not through bred obligation or genetic conditioning, but through your own choice, exactly as you chose to protect me when everyone else abandoned that responsibility." A stunned silence falls across the hall. No Velkorath in 1,000 years has broken from the tradition of the bred Vantiri honor guard, and certainly none has ever extended such an offer to a human, a species my empire has spent generations teaching itself to overlook. Ethan steps forward slowly, and for a moment I worry he might decline, might feel the weight of tradition and prejudice too heavily to accept a role his own society has taught him he could never hold. Instead, he meets my eyes steadily, the same calm resolve he showed throughout our entire ordeal. "I never asked for a title," he says quietly, though his voice carries clearly across the silent hall. "I only wanted to make sure you made it home safely. But if you're asking me to keep doing that, formally or not, then yes, I accept." The hall erupts into a mixture of murmured shock and cautious approval, courtiers exchanging glances, uncertain how to process a decision so thoroughly outside every tradition they have known. My father, however, simply nods slowly, something like understanding, perhaps even respect, settling into his expression. "Then let the court record reflect this decision," my father announces. "Let it be known that when bred loyalty failed my daughter completely, it was a man our empire once considered beneath serious notice who stood between her and death, without hesitation, without expectation of reward. Let this serve as a lesson to every household across our systems. Loyalty bred through genetics and blood oath means nothing beside loyalty chosen freely, in the moment it matters most." I stand at the center of that hall, beside a man my empire taught me to overlook, and I understand, more clearly than any lesson from my entire imperial education ever managed to teach me, that strength is not something measured by bloodline or species or centuries of careful genetic cultivation. It is measured in the moment someone chooses to stay, when every reasonable incentive points toward leaving. In the days that follow, the investigation into Lord Kydron's conspiracy expands, uncovering additional collaborators within the court, additional evidence of how deeply his ambition had spread before it was finally stopped. Justice moves slowly through the formal channels of imperial law, methodical and thorough, ensuring that everyone complicit in the plot against my life faces the full weight of consequence their actions have earned. Ethan remains close throughout it all, no longer standing at the edges of formal gatherings, uncertain of his place, but positioned exactly where he has earned the right to stand, beside me, watching over me not because bred obligation demands it, but because he chooses to, every single day, exactly as he chose to on that dying transport when every other guard I trusted chose to run instead. I think often, in the quiet moments between formal court obligations, of the 6 guards who fled at the very first sign of danger, of the empty promises woven into their genetically conditioned oaths, and I understand now that my empire built an entire system of loyalty on a foundation that could be purchased the moment the price grew high enough. It took a man my own people taught me to overlook entirely to show me what genuine loyalty actually looks like, freely given, fiercely defended, asking for nothing beyond the simple decency of being seen. My empire is beginning to change, slowly, as word of what happened aboard that transport spreads across every system under our banner. Other households have begun quietly reconsidering the value of their own bred honor guards, wondering how many of those sworn protectors might abandon their posts under similar pressure, wondering whether chosen loyalty might prove sturdier than anything genetics alone could ever guarantee. As for myself, I no longer need to wonder. I already know the answer, because I lived through the proof of it myself, standing in a burning corridor with nothing left but a stranger's steady presence beside me, refusing to leave, exactly when it would have been easiest for him to go. Ethan Cole stayed, and in staying, he taught an empire that had forgotten how to recognize true loyalty exactly what it actually looks like, standing quietly beside someone in danger, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, simply because it was the right thing to do.